This is an 8-iron, and it's a dead shank.
Wow.
Way right.
Oh, takes a hop
shank.
off the path.
You got to be kidding me. Very tough pitch shot right here. You got to hit it into the hill. One hop up and bite, and it's in.
Kind of like that.
Well, I would like to welcome the winner of 25 professional events from all around the world and a commentator from Sky Sports Golf, Tony Johnstone, to the Sub 70 podcast. Tony, thank you for taking the time today. I really, really appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure. I managed to fit you into my super, super busy schedule between sleeping and doing nothing else.
And walking out and getting the mail or something, right? Yeah, I know.
Strange times.
Yeah, I haven't done one of these in a while. It just didn't feel right. But I'm really excited to talk to you. Love watching the European Tour and followed your career for years. So I'm ready to get back in the saddle of this a little bit. So my first question is, I kind of probably know the answer to this because we're not doing a whole lot. But first off, how are you and your family doing health-wise, hopefully staying safe? And is there anything besides going to get the male sleeping and having a pint that you're doing during this shutdown we're all dealing with?
Lots of time for marital arguments, I must say.
Are you winning or losing them?
No, I haven't won an argument since my daughter was born 29 years ago in this household. That's for sure. But no, I suppose we're all going through the same thing, just trying to find things to do. All the stuff that you put on the back burner for the last 20 years, tidying up, fixing, DIY. What can we do? You just got to try and abide by the rules, stay home. Unfortunately, there's still too many people that are not taking this seriously, despite the numbers, the horrific numbers of people that are actually dying from this virus. It's just horribly tragic, isn't it? So, the solution, stay home, try and keep healthy, try and keep well. What more can we do?
How is golf in the United Kingdom, not from a professional level, but from just playing? Are the clubs shut down like a lot of them are here, or how are they looking at golf? Are they saying that's unsafe, don't do it, or will they let you get out there with social distancing and play a little bit?
No, courses are closed, clubs are closed. I think people can walk on golf courses, but, I think only with people that you live with, obviously, and the social distancing applies. So, I don't know. Where is this all going to end? Who knows? None of us know. But, trying to be sensible, lock the doors once a week to the supermarket to get supplies, and then just try and keep busy somehow.
European Tour, I love watching it. It's been so great since the Golf Channel years ago put the feed in. I love what you guys do at Sky. I think you guys have the right tone for covering golf, and I miss it. I miss waking up on Saturday, Sunday mornings, and it's on, seeing the players. What are you hearing about? Is there anything on the news front that says, hey, we might be starting our X, Y, or Z that you're hearing?
No, nothing whatsoever. I mean, it's full lockdown, and basically we're just going to bide our time. We've been told by European Tour Productions that, we just got to sit and chill, and our schedules that we were basically given at the beginning of the year are now, out the window. And when we start working again, they'll try and get us all to get to do some work to earn a bit of a living. But no, there's no signs here when this is going to restart. Everything's cancelled basically up until the Open in the middle of July. And it might go on longer. I think if we get to see any golf this year, we're all going to be pretty excited. So, who knows? Well, the nice thing about doing commentary on this side of the pond, though, is that, the commentators, whether you're with Sky or with the international feed, the world feed, which you guys get on Golf Channel, is, all the commentators are guys that played golf together, basically. So we're doing commentary with our buddies, and I think that comes over in the commentary that, we really do have we have great camaraderie, and we really have a great time doing the commentary. It's a lot of fun.
That was actually one of my questions I had for, later in the podcast, but as long as we're here, let's talk about it, because there's been, as you know, in the States, all kinds of not controversy, because it's a first world problem, but CBS's coverage and the flow doesn't seem right with the guys out, and I thought personally I'd hear more from Davis Love with all the experience he has about that situation and what that player is going through, and it just seems like between NBC and CBS, it's not as tight as it was. When I watch the European feed, sometimes, to me, like, you guys do less is more, where you'll have that, if Sam Torrance is doing it with that wonderful voice, and it just might be a few words and lets the golf tell the story. And there, to me, seems a different vibe between the European Tour coverage, which my personal thing, I like. I love the way you guys sort of handle it. It's a little more understated, not as on top of each other. Anyway, when you watch the American coverage, do you see the same thing, or do you think there's a difference between the way Europeans generally want to see their golf covered versus the way the Americans do? And I know it's a harder than people think it is to get that right balance of too little or too much sometimes.
Yeah, I think we do have a completely different ethic over here. You know, I remember when I first started doing any commentary in the early 2000s. Basically, you know, the rule of thumb was that if you can't add to the pictures, then just shut up, which made good sense. Sometimes the pictures just have to speak for themselves. And, you know, I think the American broadcasters definitely have a different way of doing things. One of our guys worked for one of the American broadcasters at the BMW PGA at Wentworth a couple of years ago. And, you know, they've got a different way of doing things. He was covering basically 3 holes in the commentary. And after the first session, the first day, he was pulled in and said, listen, we want you to try and pretend that you're getting paid by the word. We want no gaps. We want no silent pauses. You know, we want wall-to-wall talking the whole way through the commentary, which I'm not really that comfortable with. You know, I think there are times when, you know, the pictures do speak for themselves, and they speak better than, you know, a commentator can. Just shut the hell up and let it flow. You know, people are not stupid. They can see what's going on. And, you know, you can maybe give them some insights into what the guy's facing, you know, how the guy's been playing of late, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, sometimes I think you've just got to just shut the hell up.
What have you learned from being on the other side, from playing professional golf for all those years and winning all over the world? And then when you watch professionals play, what maybe didn't you know that you've now know from watching it on the other side or doing the commentary that kind of, wow, that's interesting. I didn't think about that when I was playing.
Purely in terms of the commentary side, you mean?
Well, in terms of maybe, you know, for example, wow, even that great player hits a bad shot every now and then, or just a strategy thing or something that once you're not in that arena and you're watching it, that, you know, that you've learned about the game at the professional level from watching a lot of other players versus you being in the arena focused on yourself and what you're doing?
Okay. I think, firstly, the first thing I think I've noticed, and, you know, guys don't really like you telling the truth sometimes, but course management. I think the course management these days, and I think this all goes back to the way the game's played, equipment, etc., but a lot of the time, I think the course management really just sucks, to be honest. I see guys hitting shots and clubs on particular holes or when they're facing particular shots on the golf course, and you can't help thinking, you know, what is this guy doing? What is he doing? You know, no person in their right mind would be doing that. And, you know, the question is how honest can you be? You know, because you can't really say, you know, this guy's being a complete dumber, because, you know, nobody likes being told that. But I think most of the players are aware that you try to call the shots as they are and the pictures as they are. You know, if the guy's hit a good shot, you say it's a good shot. If the guy chunks a chip, you know, you've got to be able to say, look, that was absolutely horrendous. He duffed it. You know, the odd guy gets a bit testy if you say things like that, but you know, that's what it is. And you know, you've got to have a rapport with the players. You know, we go out there every Tuesday and Wednesday to look at the course and try and get to talk to as many players as possible. You know, you're trying to get the inside story, and you know, you're always aware of what you can and can't use on air. So you always ask the guys, look, can that be used? And you know, you can't ever betray their trust. If you do that once, you're done. The guys will never talk to you again. But yeah, I think that side of it, and the other side is the commentary side of it. You know, when you sit in there and you've got, you know, as an ex-pro golfer, you've got enough voices in your head because we're all half punchy anyway. But suddenly you've got directors and producers and they're doing counts in your ear. And it's not for everybody. Some people just never get used to that and just can't do it. And you've got three or four people talking in your headphones. So I didn't see that side of it when I was playing. A couple of other things I didn't see is how hard the tour staff work. My God, the hours they get there. You get there way before play and you're out having a look at the course, and there are officials out there marking spots and checking the pace of the greens, and the hours they lead, the tour officials. I wasn't aware of that when I was on tour. I should have been, because maybe I wouldn't have been such a pain in the butt towards them. But, these guys get there at 5 a.m. and leave at 9 at night. I mean, it's horrendous hours. So, yeah, there are a lot of eye-openers in every department of the game, to be honest.
When you're seeing poor decision-making, do you think that's just they're hitting the wrong shot because they're hitting the wrong shot? And if it was a Tuesday round with their buddies, would they hit the right shot? In other words, do you think that pressure under the circumstances in tournament golf at the highest level makes people's thought process not as clear sometimes as it should be if they were at their home course? Like, would you say they would never hit that shot, for example?
That's a heck of a good question. I've often thought there's a job to be earned just coaching guys with course management and strategy. But I think a lot of these guys come out here now, and the management teams in some ways are at fault, because a lot of these guys have instilled in them that you are a golfing god. The whole world is there for your benefit, and you're a superstar, and they don't go out with the intention of actually learning. You get guys coming out here sort of ready to play from college, etc., and they don't seem to come out here wanting to learn, to improve, and to get the absolute most out of their game that they can. They come out, they get a couple of early wins, and, I know it all. I think that, the course management, I think a lot of players depend too much on their caddies. You're the only one that's hitting the shot. You're the only one who knows how you feel. You're the only one that sees the shot that you want to hit. And it works in reverse. Sometimes the caddies are right. Often the caddies will say, look, don't have a go at this, just chip it out sideways, and the player will take the shot on and make a complete dog's breakfast out of it. So, I don't know. It's a hard one to say, because, and some of the top players, we won't name players, but some of the top players, you see it week after week, and you see catastrophic course management errors, and you think, Tiger wouldn't have made those mistakes. Tiger was fantastic, his course management. Jack Nicklaus, of course. The really top players make great decisions. It's as simple as that.
Well, speaking of, you're talking about absolute superstars. I know Seve would have had a birthday last week. I know he was a very good friend and a competitor and everything, in between when you played the tour. What do you miss about him as a person the most when you think about it?
Everything. I mean, to this day, I still find it hard to talk about Seve without getting a lump in the throat. I was actually working on the Spanish Open the week that Seve passed away. And they said, look, we've got to have something in the studio the next morning. Will you get to the studio and do a piece on Seve? And I mean, it took me half a second to come up with the answer, absolutely not. I mean, I knew I wouldn't get 2 words out without just standing there crying like a baby. Even when we came on air, we said a bit. And, I was sitting there with Richard Boxall, and we sort of took it in turns. He would say a few words and then crack up. I would say a few words and then crack up. But we miss everything about him, the flair, the charisma, the humor, and, well, obviously the magical golf as well, because there's just no doubt in my mind that Seve was the most naturally gifted golfer that ever lived. He could do things with the golf club that I've never seen anyone do before or since. And, it was something about the guy. When he walked into a room, the whole atmosphere of the room was just elevated, especially on our side of the pond. I don't think really the Americans really got Seve in a lot of ways, and I don't think he really got the Americans in a lot of ways. I don't think he was ultra comfortable over there. But, when he played over in Europe, he was our Seve, he was our hero, and, he was just something absolutely special. Every single one of us just loved him to pieces.
I've read stories that as elevated of a champion and the status he had, he would still help a lot of people quietly with their golf games and short games and give advice, even if it was a tour rookie. Is that sort of correct, that he had that kind of heart in him, that he would help other players out and kind of do it quietly, but he wasn't just on this pedestal and wouldn't talk to the guy who was 150th on the money list that year. He was a very helpful, kind man. Was that a correct statement from my side?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. He was always keen to help others improve. He was keen to beat your brains in on the golf course, but on the range, Sandy Lyle was another one, actually. Never forget Sandy. Sandy, it always amazed me. He would walk down the range, and if he saw, the lowliest guy on tour, a rookie who just come from the tour school, struggling, Sandy would stop and give the guys 2 hours of his time. Sevi was the same. Sevi, he loved to help. And then he would also love to show you how to do it properly, in which case he'd walk away and you'd think, how the hell am I ever going to do that? I'll tell you a funny little story. I mentioned it on a podcast the other day. We were at a golf tournament, and I was on the putting green late in the evening. Sevi was the only one on the putting green, and my little boy, Dale, he was little in those days. He was about 5. And I was always a very jab putter, very stabby stroke. And Sevi comes wandering over. He says, "Hey, Tommy." He always called me Tommy. I don't know why, but I was always Tommy. Tommy, you putt like that. I said, I've putted like this my whole life, Sevi. He said, no, I show you how to putt properly. And he starts getting me to stroke the putt. And my young son, Dale, is sitting the other side of the hole. So Sevi looks at me and says, "Hey, Dale, you're doing nothing. You throw the ball back." Dale says, "No, this is okay." So I hit a putt, roll it in. Dale takes the ball out the hole, stands up and winds it up underhand and just lets go. And absolutely nails Sevi right in the crown jewels. Absolutely pins him, and he just goes down on his hands and knees like a sack of potatoes. It was the funniest thing. And there were people out on the veranda watching him, and he was groveling in the dirt. It was just, and my poor boy Dale, he just stood. It was just, that age, he knew Sevi was great. But Sevi finally gets his breath back, and typical Sevi, he just looked at me and said, "Hey, Dale," he says, "you know what? You throw really good, eh?" So yeah, Sevi was my boy's hero from that moment on as well. But yeah, he just had such a wonderful streak of humanity in him. I don't know if it was because of his upbringing, the poor background, not having much money, but he always appreciated the warmer things in life and having warmth with people, and that's why we loved him so much.
I had Clark Dennis on the podcast, and he got to play with Sevi at the Players Championship, and talking about helping. And I said, "You got any great stories from the tour?" He's like, "Got to play with Sevi at the Players." And after Thursday, Friday rounds, they're signing the scorecards, and he goes to Clark, "Hey, you hit it pretty good, Clark, but the short game, that's not so good." And he said, "I just thought I'd tell you, you hit a bet about shots." So he actually then went with Sevi and got a chipping lesson, because he's like, Clark's like, apparently, and I was not good that week. That was driving Sevi so crazy after 36 holes of as good as I was hitting it and bad as my short game was, he couldn't take it. And he's like, I got to help this kid out. And he's like, he was hitting shots, chipping with 3 irons that I couldn't do with a sand wedge. He's like, it was unbelievable the different shots he showed me how to hit. And it was just like watching a magician do it. He says short game was that good. It was just, he could do anything with the club. And Clark said, it was just one of his greatest memories of just hanging out with Sevi and getting a chipping lesson. But he's like, oh man, it was a shit show. Sevi couldn't take it anymore. So but he's like, he gave it all the time, right? That he needed to help him. He's just like, he was such a good guy.
Yeah, no, he was. And his short game was mind-boggling. And, even at the end of his career, when he could hit a 5-iron off the tee and miss the entire golf course. But the one thing that never deserted him was his short game. I played with him in the Volvo Masters the one year at a course called Monte Castilla. And Sevi was, he was way, way past his best. And his long game was horrific. He really couldn't hit the golf course. And we got up on the 1 par 3 there, and it was a 5-iron, and he hit it 40 yards left up a bank that must have been a 40-degree bank. And the flag was tucked 4 yards on the green on the left-hand side, and he was in thick, thick grass. And, he could hardly get a stance. And I thought, well, this is going to take forever. Well, he hit a shot there that you could just never duplicate. He hit this thing, it came out high, soft, landed just on the green and finished short of the hole, a foot short of the hole. And I just looked at this and I thought, he's still got the absolute magic. He was still phenomenal. And there'd been rain delays. We were off the 10th tee. Colin Montgomery was off the first tee. I think he was leading the tournament. And Seve had the whole crowd. I mean, everybody was following Seve. I think everybody realized that, he was coming towards the end of his career. It was before he'd been diagnosed with cancer, sadly. And we had a massive crowd, and all they wanted to see was moments of genius like that. And when he played the shot, I can't remember who the third was in the group, but we just looked at each other, and, it was like, my God, what have we just seen here? And as Clark says, just did things with a golf club that were contrary to physics, literally contrary to physics. You just couldn't explain how he did it.
When it went bad, there's always these stories of him seeing all these different teachers and stuff. Looking back at it now, because he kind of had a really athletic, if you look at his golf swing in his prime, yeah, it was, not textbook, but obviously it worked pretty well most of the time. And it looked natural and flowing and not a whole lot of thought. And then it kind of, is it fair to say he got a little mechanical and then he just sort of lost the feel, or was there a yip in the full swing? What do you think happened to that ball striking where, it got to the point where it really was, even as good as the short game was, hard for him to play at that top professional level?
Yeah, I think I was talking with Mike Clayton and Billy Foster, Seve's longtime caddy, the other day on a podcast, and one of them made the point that he, maybe because Felder had come on tour, Felder was sort of eclipsing Seve slightly, and we all know that Felder was mega technical, and I think Seve sort of took this to heart and started deciding to get a more technically correct swing. But Seve would ask everybody. He would ask the guy that polished the shoes in the locker room, how to improve his game. But he wouldn't really listen to anybody, if I'm honest. I remember playing with him in the South African PGA Championship at Houghton a few years before he stopped playing. And he was all over the place. And my coach out there, Martin Witcher, is a very, very good golf coach. And I said to Seve, look, after the round, let's just go and see my coach. Let's just go and see Martin Witcher and spend an hour and just see what he sees. So we went off to Martin's studio at Rand Park Golf Club in Joburg. And, we were there for probably 2 hours. And, he was ahead of the time, Martin, with all the equipment he had and the cameras, etc. And he got Seve absolutely striping it. And the next day, Seve came out and playing the second round and just did exactly what he was doing the previous day. Just didn't even try it on the golf course. So he just wouldn't pay attention. But one of the interesting things of that whole incident too was just to show how well he was known. We stopped off for petrol. I was driving him home, and as he stepped out the car, everybody on the forecourt of the service station, they were like bees around a honeypot. Within a second, everybody recognized him, which was saying something about Seve. But yeah, he wouldn't listen to anybody. He would ask advice, but maybe he'd try it once or twice. If it didn't work, he would. And I think he got so confused and flustered by the whole thing with the golf swing. I don't think he actually knew through impact what the heck was going on. Whereas, in the best part of his career, he didn't care. It was all in the hands. It was all in feel. It was all in timing. It was just completely natural. And I think once he tried to get, or once he let himself get obsessed with technique and mechanics, it definitely blew his mind.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And there's, players have had that kind of, they had it, then they've lost it, and some have gotten it back, and, some like David Duval never did, right? It's always it's a strange thing, golf. It's, between greatness and losing your card, the line isn't that far off sometimes at that level.
Ian Baker Finch. Ian Baker Finch literally overnight went from, a marvelous player to it just went. Where the heck does it go? When you see that, you look at it and you think, as a golfer, you think, you know what, Finchy and David Duval, both smart guys. You look at it and you think, well, if it can happen to them, it can happen to anybody.
Exactly.
So, you just have maximum sympathy. It's the same with putting yips. You see guys with the strongest minds. Look at Bernhard Langer. If he can get the yips, anybody can get the yips. It's as simple as that. So you just pray that it never happens to you.
I was going to ask you about growing up in South Africa, in Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. What was life like in that country when you were growing up, and do you make it back there very often these days?
I go back once a year. I've got a buddy who owns a game farm there, and I love wildlife and nature. So I go and spend a week just walking around the bush, enjoying the solitude. But growing up in Rhodesia as it was then it was fantastic. I mean, to be honest, we could not have had a better upbringing as kids. You know, it was just so relaxed and so chilled. You didn't lock your doors at home. It was wonderful. Golf-wise, you know, in the school holidays, our parents would drop us off, and they would give us $1. They'd drop us off at 5 in the morning. At 7 in the morning, and pick us up at 5 in the evening after work. And we would just spend the whole day at the golf course. We would play and practice, and you know, we would feed ourselves. We'd have a bit of a gamble for a pie and a Coke during the round. And when the folks fetched us, they asked us for the change. We gave them back change. It used to cost us 5 cents to play the golf course as many times as we like, all day long, each day. And we had great junior programs. You know, the parents were all involved. And at the very best, we probably had 10,000 golfers in Rhodesia. I'll call it Zimbabwe because people get twitchy about it. But you know, out of 10,000 golfers, we turned out Nick Price, Mark McNulty, myself, Dennis Watson, Simon Hobday. You know, there was just so many fantastic players. We had great junior programs. We had great club programs. They used to have a junior inter-club tournament once a year. And I was a member at the secondary club in Bulawayo, my hometown. And for the junior inter-club tournament the one year, we went down there with 8 guys, and the highest handicapper was a scratch golfer.
Wow.
I mean, it was phenomenal how the country turned out so many great players. Obviously, Nick was, you know, top dog. You know, I've been knowing Nick, my first trip away from home ever as a 12-year-old. I stayed with Nick and his mom in Harare, and, you know, lifelong friends ever since, and as nice a man as you could ever meet. But, you know, how did such a tiny country produce so many fantastic golfers? It really was a wonder.
How's Zimbabwe doing today? I've read that they're trying to do some reforms to the economy to try to bring it back. I know it's still your home country, so I'm sure you want to see it do well, but are they starting to turn a corner a little bit from that standpoint?
No, they've gone around the corner but fallen straight down the staircase. I mean, it's a complete shambles. It really is. You know, unfortunately, you know, and I'm not talking out of line here, but anyone who knows anything about African politics, the corruption is just completely out of hand. You know, the top dogs look after themselves, and everybody else suffers. And no, it hasn't improved whatsoever. To be honest, it's sheer chaos out there.
Well, I've seen these great photos that you put on social media of the wildlife in Africa, and I'm assuming as a kid growing up, were you out in the bush a lot, and was it more hunting back then, and now you do more photography, or how much was the outdoors and all that stuff a part of your life when you were living there as a young man?
Very much so. You know, we lived out of town a bit, and just across the road there was quite a big area of bushveld, and you know, from the age of 10 or 11, you know, every kid had an air rifle. And, you know, before I really got interested in golf, I would have my water bottle on my hip, my air rifle. And in my mind, I was a great white hunter, as they used to call it in those days. Didn't really shoot anything, but I used to spend all day just walking around the bush looking at plants and insects and birds and whatever I could find. You know, the one fear for parents, obviously, was snakes, because there are a lot of snakes out there. But to be honest, I never saw one. And, I just loved being out in the bush, loved everything about it. I was never much of a hunter. I mean, I've done a bit of vermin control over the years, but I was never a hunter or a trophy hunter or a meat hunter. Just fell in love with the bush from a very, very early age. And it's been one of the great joys in my life. My wife and I go out to, other than my trip to Zim once a year, we go out to the Kruger Park in South Africa once or twice a year, and spend 8 to 10 days out there. And yeah, the sense of solitude and peace, I can't find anything else that compares with it.
Yeah, the pictures you put out there are absolutely stunning. It's cool to see. So I think a lot of people enjoy seeing them. And yeah, at some point, I have some friends from South Africa, and it's a little I'm sure it'd be fine for the most part. At some point in my life, I got to go over there and go on a safari and see it. But I've always questioned, where do you go and how safe is it and all that other good stuff. It seems like it's changing a little bit. So,
yeah, no, I think things are getting better. It's hard to beat the national parks out there, the Kruger Park. You've got some private great game reserves, and you're in the parks and you're completely safe. You're safe from human beings anyway. You've got to toe the line and follow the rules with the animals, because people do some silly stuff out in the parks. They think it's the local safari park where they can go out and pet the lions and they get eaten. So, it's definitely worth doing. You've got to go on a safari to Africa once. And, well, the trouble is, once you've been once, you won't stop at once, because the bug will get you and you'll want to do it again and again.
Well, it's definitely on the bucket list for me at some point in life. I definitely got to get there. Was going to ask you, too, what was your pathway to professional golf? So you played a lot as an amateur, got good quick. When did you know you were good enough that you were going to make a go of this and try it, to make a living and be a successful touring professional?
Within probably 6 months of taking up golf, which happened as an accident. We were on a holiday up in the Eastern Highlands in Zimbabwe at a little 9-hole golf course, and the hotel manager just roped everybody, and he said, everyone in the hotel is playing in the golf competition tomorrow. None of us had ever played golf. I went out with my dad, had golf drilled into me at an early age. On the final hole, we knew nothing about it. My dad hit his best shot of the day into a huge boulder 10 yards ahead, came straight back at my head, put my arm up in front of me, caught me right on the corner of my elbow, which led to floods of tears. You think right there and then I would have said, this game is going to drive me nuts. But we went home, he bought some second-hand clubs, and from that moment on, we were addicted. And, it's all I ever really wanted to do. And, my folks wanted me to get an education. So, I progressed and I got better. I played for Rhodesia, Zimbabwe, and then, we had an agreement. They said, look, you get an education and we'll sponsor you for a year on tour. So I went off to university in Durban down in South Africa, did a degree in Bachelor of Arts. I majored in English and psychology. Can you believe it? If you tell anybody I majored in psychology, they'll laugh at you, because I was Looney Tunes on the golf course. And, I got to provincial level, and it's really all I want to do. And I don't think you ever know if you're good enough. You might believe you're good enough. And, I had quite an unusual action, and I was a very twitchy golfer. I fidgeted horrifically at setup, and a lot of people thought, you're just dreaming. But, you believe you can do it, then you've got to go out there and try and prove it. Look, I had good breaks along the way. You see guys that are fantastically good players who just don't get the right break at the right time and never really make it in the game. So, I worked very, very hard. I always think I was somebody of maybe slightly better than average talent. So, I had to put a lot more into it. And nothing annoys me more to this day than when I see a talented player who won't put the hours in. Wasted talent drives me nuts. But, you never know it until you actually get across the line. Until I won my first tournament as a pro, the South African Open in '84. You believe, but you don't know, and there's a big difference in that.
What was the major tours in the late 70s, early 80s like vibe-wise back then? I'm guessing there was a few more trips to the bar than the workout gym at that point in time, and there had to be some real interesting casts of characters traveling the world, playing some golf, and having a few adventures along the way. At least that's how I picture it in my head, of some lot more fun going on, particularly on a Friday or Saturday night or something to that extent.
Yeah, no. I mean, we had a lot of fun. There were a lot of characters out there. I'm a teetotaler, so I missed out on some of the fun. But I used to love watching these other guys, going from perfectly sensible citizens to complete raving lunatics. We did have a lot of fun. I've actually been doing a little series of tour tales on Twitter about just things that we did in the 70s and 80s. And, it was a big difference. Prior to having kids, when things would change, when your wife would come out on tour with the kids, when you were out there, and once the kids had started school and you were back on your own again, you were out on tour, and your support structure was basically your caddy and your buddies. That was it. These days the guys go out and they have, they've got the manager and they've got the coaches and the physio and the sports psychologist, At Firestone a couple of years ago, I was over there for a President Cup meeting, and walking down the range listening, the one guy, I won't give any names, had 13 people on his payroll with him there that week. You know, and they all go out in a little group together, and they don't really socialize that much. And it's a completely different setup now. Yeah, we used to go down to reception in the evenings, and you know, the European has always been a multinational tour, and you'd sit there and then you just wait for guys to arrive. You'd get a Southern African and an Aussie and an American and a Spaniard and a Frenchman, and you'd just band together in a little group and go and find a restaurant. And, you know, the camaraderie was absolutely fantastic. And, yeah, the guys did get up to a lot more hijinks in those days, no question.
Do you think it's better for golf to have the 13 people around you? Do you think there's a benefit to it, or do you think sometimes that can be overplayed and you don't need that many people around you to kind of, you know, make it work and find it and have greatness, right? Do you think sometimes they can rely too much on those other people when they really don't need them potentially? Yeah,
look, I mean, you know, there's so much money out there that the guys can afford now to take this team of people along with them, but yeah, I do think it's overdone. I think, you know, some of it's good, but I think it also smothers natural talent. You know, you've got so many people firing their ideas at you, and, you know, you're trying all this stuff. You know, I think, you know, I'm sure, look, Tiger always had his coach there, and we know, you know, with the SEALs, he did a bit of SEALs training, etc., when he was young. But, you know, a lot of the great players, the likes of Tiger and Rory, you know, they'll have their physical guy, they'll have their, I'm trying to find the word now. They'll have their chiropractor or whatever, their trainer to help them along, which is a good thing. We used to have to do that ourselves. We just go and run or find a gym or something. But, you know, the bottom line is they don't tend to be that open to advice. They have their ideas, they have their ability, and off they go, and they just produce it. Yeah, and I think sometimes it is overdone. I think, you know, if I was going to have a youngster, I'd say, listen, first of all, go out there and show us what you can do. You've got a game. Go and show the world what you can do, and then you can fine-tune it.
Back to some of the characters. I know you were great friends with Simon Hobday, and I actually got to meet Simon once at a Champions Tour event, in the 90s, I think. And he was hilarious. Yeah, I got his autograph. I think he won the U.S. Senior Open, right? So I think I got the golf week that he signed for me, and he was very, very funny. I remember big smile on his face with a mustache, and I'm assuming there has to be a couple good Simon Hobday stories from back in the day.
Well, I tell you what, if I start on Hobday stories, this podcast better get on for 2 days. Hobbs was the most naturally funny man I ever came across. You know, I played with Trevino a few times, and Lee was very funny, but, you know, after 6 or 7 holes, the repertoire of the day would start repeating itself. Hobbs was the greatest exponent of the one-liner, and they were originals. It was just stuff that came into his head. And, you know, and I never heard him repeat a one-liner. They just came to him. And he was the funniest man I ever came across. I mean, the funniest man I ever came across. And Hobbs had this running battle with God. He was convinced, Hobbs, that he was the unluckiest man on the planet. And he had, you know, you'd be playing with him and he'd nail a drive down the fairway and you say, good shot, Hobbs. And he'd get halfway off the tee and stop and go, no. What's the problem? And he'd stick his finger up his nose and say, that's dead. It's like that. Finger up the nose. That's in a divot. And you looked at his Hobbs, you can't even see what the ball is. We're over a slight rise. No, I'm telling you, I can feel it. I know. He's done it to me again. God's done it to me again. And I promise you 9 out of 10 times he would be absolutely right. Well, if you hit it slightly off the fairway, there'd be one tree. And he'd go, that's dead. Finger up the nose. That's dead. He's got me again. You get their ball stone dead behind the tree. And he had all sorts of tricks to try and confuse God. He would carry an array of headgear in his golf bag, and he would keep changing headgear. And you weren't allowed to call him Simon. He'd say, "Don't call me Simon or Hobbs." And he'd point up at the sky and say, "I think I've got him fooled. He doesn't know it's me." And then inevitably, somewhere along the line, he would have some horrific break-in. Yeah. And he'd look up the skies and, why don't you just come down there and fight like a man? We'd all back off, you know, expecting the lightning bolt. and then he'd change headgear. Well, he'd grab the headgear off a playing partner to try and imitate their walk. I remember doing it once with Ian Mosey, who had this very unusual walk. Grabbed his hat and Hobbes. I'm not Hobbes. I've got him fooled again. and until the luck persisted, you wouldn't get your headgear back. And he was just hilarious, and just everything he did, and to his final hours, Hobbes was like that. Hobbes could not say a prepared speech for all his, ability to talk and tell stories. And he and I were both inducted into the South African Hall of Fame on the same night. So I got up and made my speech, and Hobbes always looked like he'd been dragged backwards through a bush. You could take him to Savile Row and get the most expensive suits fitted, and once he got it on, it still looked like he'd been run over by a truck. I mean, and I'll get back to that side of it in a minute. But he gets up to get inducted in the Hall of Fame, and he's got the black tie on and the penguin suit, and he reaches into his pocket and he starts looking around at the audience, and he pulls out this piece of paper the size of a postage stamp, and he starts unfolding this piece of paper and looking at everybody. He says, "Before I even start, I want you all to know that this could not have happened to a nicer guy." That was his opening line. And then he got up. Eventually, he opened up. His whole speech was about 2 inches by 2 inches, and actually said a wonderful speech. But going back to when he was at death's door, we'd heard, and I phoned him up on Thursday, and he passed away the following Friday. And I said to him, "Listen, Hobbes, I'm sorry to hear you so unwell." I won't use the exact language because he could swear like a trooper. And he said, "Ill? I'm not ill. I'm out of here. I'm done." And he started laughing. So at the end of the conversation, I said, "Hobbes, you know how much we all loved you." He said, "Well, of course. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you love me?" And Peter Makovich, his good buddy, was at his bedside basically as he was about to pass away. And he says to Matko, "What am I going to say? What am I going to say if I get lucky and go to heaven? What do I say to them?" Matko says, "Hobbes, listen, I don't know what you're going to say, but whatever you do, don't go with a prepared speech because you will cock it up." And with that, Hobday just laughed and passed away. I mean, isn't that just a wonderful way for a man like that to leave the mortal coil? I mean, he was a proper person, Hobday.
I remember meeting him. I just remember the smile. He had this huge smile signing autographs, right? And funny comments and all the time in the world, but the big smile, right? He had this big smile on his face, post round and happy to sign autographs. And of course, I still remember that clothes did not look like the rest of the professionals. Like I said, it looked like nothing was pressed right. And it looked like a guy who was a 20 handicap at your club who had a bender the night before. Like, it's like usually professionals, they got that, you know what I mean? Like, you can tell a professional. Simon looked like he could have been playing like a 20 handicap at your local 9-hole muni.
Yeah, shirt hanging out. Well, and how he used to do his washing up. He used to get back, throw everything in the bath, and he loved reading, and so he'd pour a bit of washing powder in, and he'd sit there with his two on and stir the bath while he read his book. He'd just sit there and stir with the two on, and then he'd hang everything up around the bathroom, and then whatever was dry first got worn. If it was purple trousers and an orange shirt, those are dry, that'll do. And forget the ironing. Honestly, the shirt was always hanging out. He was an absolute scruff, but he was one of probably the three best strikers in my mind. 4 maybe that ever lived. Hogan I never got to see, but I played quite a lot with Tom Watson, and he was still is just unbelievable. Words can't describe it. Nick Price was another one, and Hobbes was the other. I mean, Hobbes was just, my club's always had a worn patch on the face that, with the size of a 50-cent piece or a dollar coin. And Hobbes had this tiny little thing of the size of a fingernail in the middle of his club face. And Nick and I, the one day, were sitting with him, and when we were juniors, and said, "Well, Simon, what do you think about when you hit the ball?" He said, "Oh, that's easy. You just think about hitting the sweet spot." We looked at each other and we thought, "Oh, okay." A, it was great advice, but B, it came so easily to him. He was the most fantastic striker of a golf ball. But sadly, his putting didn't match up to it. He was a good bunker player, good chipper, but his putting, he was really, really jumpy with the putter. And when he won the US Seniors Open, I don't know if you ever saw the interview. They said, so how nervous were you on that last putt? He says, I was way too nervous to choke.
Well, and you think about his golf swing was technically like perfect.
It was just
right?
amazing.
Like the positions, and I'm back in that generation. I mean, that was just his swing, right? But there wasn't much to go wrong with that. I'm just visualizing the path of his swing in my head, and I mean, it was about as simple as it got, right? I mean, it's just sort of back to that slot position, turn through with everything he had, and boy, talk about a repeatable golf swing.
Oh, man. And, when he did come out on tour, guys who were great strikers, the likes of Nick Price, Darren Clark, they would take time to go and sit there and watch Hobday strike the ball. That's how good he was. And people don't know that he was a fantastic sportsman, an all-round sportsman. When he was young, he lived in Zambia, and he played rugby for Zambia. He played a couple of sports at top level. He was just a very naturally gifted sportsman. He really was. He was brilliant.
Well, let's talk about a few of your wins. 6 of them on the European Tour over a 17-year period, which is really impressive. I think golf fans finally start to understand how hard that is to be relevant on tour for that long. And what was your key to being a world-class player for that extended period of time? And is there, out of those 6 wins on the European Tour, is the one that stands out as sort of your crowning achievement in your mind?
The biggest win for me was the Volvo PGA at Wentworth, now the BMW PGA. Other than the 5 majors, that was tied with the Players' Championship in the States at that time for the highest world rank points tournament. So that was huge, and I got a 10-year exemption for it, which was fantastic. It took so much pressure off. But every win was special. I can remember every win. I can remember coming down the home stretch of every win I ever had. It's always hard to pick one. I mean, probably the South African Open, my very first win in 1984. We talked about believing you can win and knowing you could win. That was probably the most important win of my career. But the PGA at Wentworth was definitely the biggest. And I love competing. I just love competing. If you don't love competing and you can't put the travel and the loneliness and solitude behind you, it's not the right line of work for you.
17 years. I mean, like I said, what's also that key to be that good for that long? There's no one else taking your card. You're still 20 years plus top level player. To me, I don't think like Pat Perez on the American Tour gets enough credit just to, he's had his card for like 22, 23 years straight. Those guys who there's no fall off. They just are like machines. Charles Hall III, 3 wins or whatnot. But I mean, guy makes $2 million every year. Like, you were competitive for that extended period of time. Imagine all the great players or younger coming up can't bump you from the tour, and you're still winning over that period of time. Is it more on the mental side? Were you lucky that you stayed injury free? What was sort of your key to that longevity?
Short game and lots of practice. I knew when I first came on our tour and saw the likes of Seve that I was going to have to put in some serious practice and have to work really hard and develop a game to compete out there. The love of competing was part of it, but the hard work and dedication. And I was very fortunate that I developed a really good short game. I was an excellent putter inside sort of 8 feet. I was never a brilliant long putter. I always had an issue with my eyes. My depth perception wasn't too good. I always practiced my long game a third and my short game 2/3. That was my goal. Because I was never a particularly long hitter. I was a decent striker, but not a great striker. And I knew that to be able to make a career out of it, and a career is not 5 or 10 years. You want to be doing it for, 20, 25, 30 years, from starting off my career to finishing on the seniors tour it was a 35-year span, basically. And you've got to be, if you haven't got a short game, you're wasting your time. There's a lot of talk about the importance of the long game. Yes, it is very important, but the difference between winning and not winning is down to short game, and nobody will ever convince me otherwise. So, and you've got to love it. You've got to love playing. You've got to love competing. I mean, the playing side of it, the game always drove me slightly to distraction. I was always fairly bad-tempered on the golf course. I used to come off the course every day embarrassed about my behavior and thinking tomorrow will be different. And the next day I'd go out and act like an immature toddler again.
Well, I think the game can do that to all of us, right? Even at the professional level or amateur level, you're half sadistic if this is your best passion in life that you're going to be most of the time, right? It's not perfect, and you put all this effort and time in, and even us amateur golfers go through that of, but you hit a couple shots and you come back, right? It's still in there. I'll find it. Short game too. Like, what do you see? I mean, like I said, you've always been regarded as one of the best short games in the world when you were playing the tour. When you were in pro-ams and watching amateur players, is there one or two things that you saw most people do incorrectly, even on kind of the basics level of their short game and how they could improve quite quickly if they would just do X?
Yes. Chipping is basic fundamentals. Get the ball back in your stance towards your right foot, set up with your hands ahead, and, you have to accelerate. So acceleration's always the key in any shot in golf. A lot of weekend golfers will make a long backswing and then just decelerate through the ball and duff it. And the other big thing that mid to high handicappers do, they get behind a bunker with a sand wedge and they're trying to help the ball up in the air. They won't let the club head and the loft do the work for them. So I would say ball back in the stance, hands ahead, use enough loft, and make sure that you compress the ball down into the turf. You've got to hit ball first, squeeze into the turf. The loft will do all the work for you. And then you can alter the flight by opening the club face or shifting it slightly. And, I mean, basically, it's just not as complicated as people make out. And a bit of practice. There are a lot of coaches out there that make it sound like the short game is alchemy. And it isn't. You can basically teach anybody the basic fundamentals of chipping and bunker play. The putting's a different department. Some guys are just gifted with an ability on the putting green. I liked in pro-ams to give the guys tips on the short game because that was my forte. I was never a very technically correct swinger of the golf club, never really into golf mechanics. So, I used to leave that side of it alone unless it was basics, So that was it. Short game. Loved it. It's the only, I really don't play. I stopped playing 5 years ago. And the only thing I really miss is doing short game practice, which I do a little bit of. But, you go there and you see these shots that you could hit 5 years ago and, you do exactly the opposite and want to tear your hair out. So I don't do very much.
Have other touring professionals sought you out for help with their short game? And if they have, is it quite rewarding to work with the world's best when they come to you and potentially see how you can help them or what technique you think they can improve upon?
Yes. I've helped quite a few of the boys. Some very good players. I'm not going to mention names. I'm not blowing my own trumpet here. But, quite a few guys have come to me, particularly for bunker play. Bunker play was, the strongest part of my game. And that coming from Southern Africa was purely because of Gary Player. He was the greatest bunker player in the world, so you wanted to emulate him. And, he would come occasionally up to Rhodesia as it was and do clinics. And, I used to watch this guy in the sand and just sit there with my jaw hanging. He could get the ball to stop on the first bounce, the second bounce, the third bounce, plugged lies. There's so many variations in the bunker, so many different shots, and I thought, well, I want to be as good or better than him. And I used to spend hours and hours and hours every single day of the school holidays just practicing bunker play. So, during my career, I used to wear out 2 or 3 ping sand irons a year just practicing bunker play. I just loved bunker play. I loved the sensation of the club going through the sand, and you could tell immediately what spin you had on it, how it was going to bounce. I just loved it. So guys do come to me still and ask me for help up the sand. And again, there's a lot of absolute tosh spoken about bunker play. Sometimes, look, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great coaches out there, but, there's also a lot of guys who have to justify their existence. So they've got to reinvent the wheel, and more often than not, it's total rubbish. Every great bunker player I've known in history has done the same basic things out of the sand. Guys want to try and reinvent it, set up square, set up closed, take the club inside the line. No. Don't listen to any of that stuff.
Do you think because of Mr. Play, because I think of South African golfers, they all have like great bunker games. What do you think about? Do you think that's all from Mr. Player going down through the generations of emulating what he did?
Yeah, without question. He sort of encouraged us without, saying it to us. We encouraged ourselves to have great short games. We'd all seen what Gary did because of his short game. He was a notorious snap hooker of the golf ball with a driver. So his short game and his wedge play were fantastic. That got passed on to us, and then the generation after us saw Gary and the rest of us doing it. And I think, try to emulate what we did. We would spend time with the new guys on pro, and, we'd all sort of share ideas and things. But basically, yes, it all stemmed from Gary, no question.
The modern golf game today, if you were made king for all of golf, USGA, R&A, all the rules, and they would have to implement your one or two changes you would make to the professional game and maybe the amateur game. I don't know if you're a fan of bifurcation at this point, but if you could make a couple changes in the game, what would those be?
Well, first thing I would address would be equipment, no question. I think that's the single biggest change. I think it's the new equipment it's detracting from skill required to play the game. The ball goes too far. There's so many things they need to address: size of club heads, etc., driver heads. They're dumbing the game down, and the challenge of the game was that it was very difficult, and nobody was ever going to perfect it. They still won't, but it's just made the game a lot easier. And I feel sorry for the players these days that have never felt the feel of a Belata ball off a persimmon head. It was the most glorious feel when you got one right out the screws, timed it perfectly. There was nothing to match it in the modern game.
I still have nightmares though, because I'm 47 years old, so I grew up with that equipment of it was a different game, right? Because you couldn't swing as hard, but oh my gosh, you can't snap hook the old or the new equipment like you could the old equipment, right? I still have night terrors of millisecond from a good swing to just left of left, right? The new equipment doesn't do that. You just can't snap it like that.
No, you talk to the modern players about a snap hook, they look at you, like you're an alien. They don't really know what you're talking about. I think we lost a lot with the new equipment. I really do think the game did lose. It lost a lot of feel. And, you hit on a good point there. With the old equipment, you had to swing at 80 or 90%. The old ball used to spin so much. If you hit it 100%, the thing would take off and just go off sideways. If there was any side spin on it, you were going to miss a fairway by, you could miss a fairway, the longer hitters by 100 yards plus. And you just don't see that anymore.
No, and our home course has a Division I golf program at Northern Illinois there, and, I'm still swing irons at 80, 85% just because I can't get it out of my system. It's how I was taught to play. I watch these college kids now who are 6'3", and they hit 8-iron from like 180, and like you couldn't have done that with the old equipment that I grew up. You couldn't do it. The ball would have just gone any wind into that thing with that much spin, or it would have spun so much hitting it that hard. Yeah. It would have been unplayable. And you can really see the divide between, I'm of the older generation where you don't go that hard at a lot of the clubs. And then if you started playing golf, 2003 onward with the modern, let's call that the start of the modern equipment, modern two-piece ball, it is a totally different game. It's a totally different game of the way they play it, the distance they see it, hit it, how they see the shots.
Yeah.
So, would you, if you, so we got this sort of divide there. Would you give the amateur golfers like myself the modern equipment? Would you have the rules bifurcate per se, so we could still play the new equipment and enjoy how much easier it makes it, and then change it just for the professionals? Or how would you then address the amateur game with the professional game?
Well, I think the first thing you'd have to address is, did amateurs who played with softer balls and persimmon clubs, did they enjoy the game any less than amateurs do with the modern equipment today? And I don't really think they did. I think part of the charm of golf and the challenge was the fact that it was always difficult. It was meant to be difficult. It's the most difficult game in the world. But to address your question of bifurcation, yes, I think I probably would let the amateurs keep on with the new stuff, or give them the option. But tour-wise, there's a lot of talk about how much better athletes guys are these days. Well, I'll tell you what, you watch Greg Norman or Jack Nicklaus or, some of the bigger hitters in their day. I mean, Norman could do anything in the gym that the guys could do now. I mean, Norman was fanatical about exercise. He was as strong as anybody out there, and it was the fact that you could only hit the ball at 80%. If you hit it 100%, you were a lost soul. So that's made a huge difference. But, if the amateurs prefer playing the new stuff, let them. Why not? But tournament play, I think if you started using a softer ball or different equipment and they started seeing pros, moving the ball more in there, shaping shots, maybe they would want to do the same thing. I have no idea. It's a heck of a tough question, isn't it?
Yeah, I enjoy the new equipment. I can just for myself, I don't have to put the practice in to still play pretty darn well. And, for the most part, you can grab a modern driver, assume it's fit right for you, and you have the right ball. I don't have to put the range time in to still hit it pretty good. Where, like you said, that old equipment, you had to play a lot and time it to hit that sweet spot was so much smaller. And you had to kind of hit, for us amateurs, you had to hit the hook. Right, because you get the spin off of it, and now you can hit a little buttercut and it still doesn't spin, so you can kind of hold it off a little easier, and your misses are so much better. I enjoy not having to put the time I used to have to put in at 16, 17 years old, 30 years ago on that equipment. That's the one benefit I see of it. Of golf is awfully hard if everyone has busy lives. Would people on the amateur level not enjoy it enough once they've been exposed to this new equipment if they had to go backwards? Or would you lose golfers? Playing the game, because, but in the same token, as you well know, unless you're swinging at 110, 115 miles an hour, I swing at 100. We're not overpowering a 63 or 6,400 yard golf course, even with the new equipment. There's such an advantage at the highest level, if you can swing it at 119, of what that ball and what that equipment will do for you compared to me. So I don't mind the idea of a bifurcation. Let us just enjoy it. We don't have to build new tee boxes at our club, even at 6,400 yards for the most part.
Yeah.
But I would love to see some more mid-irons into par fours on the professional level. I think it would be interesting to actually see a 5-iron from 200 yards or 190, what that looks like.
Oh, wouldn't it be? Well, about 3 years ago, I think it was Dustin Johnson didn't hit more than a 7-iron into any par 4 the entire season. Now, that is
Correct.
just absolute nonsense. There's 14 clubs in the bag, and golf course architects in the day designed golf courses so that you were using all of those clubs. I mean, it's just complete nonsense. And I see your point, and I agree with your point about not having to practice as much. That is a big thing for amateurs. Golf is, life is a lot more hectic these days. Who has the time to go out there and hit balls for 2 hours every evening? And that is a very good point. But the professional game, I would like to see the demands on skill reintroduced, because there's no way that the modern guys are any less skilled than they were 20 or 30 years ago. These guys have got serious skills, but they're not asked the questions, and they're not asked to display the skills. They've asked 2 questions: how far can you hit it, and how well can you putt? In between, it's short irons all along, and it's just dumbed the game down so much. Watching the Masters, I still enjoy watching Augusta, but not as much as I used to with the old equipment, because there were so many other variables and so many shots that you were called on to play in 18 holes, and I think that was part of the beauty of the game.
Yeah, it's. I'm at the age I've seen the old equipment and seen the new equipment, and I shouldn't be longer off the tee than I was at 25, and I am at 47. So, that might tell you something, that it's definitely a different game.
And
it's in. And like I said, I do. If you go watch when they have the Open Championship on from the 80s on the Golf Channel during Open Week, if the tournament's going on, I'm sure they'll have it this year playing the old ones. The swings look like they're literally swinging at half speed. Norman's swung pretty hard still, but you couldn't, watching Tommy Nakajima in the day, it looks like he's just feathering something out there. And that was you played at that level with that equipment. You just couldn't go after it, especially into the wind or something. It just, even watching it looks completely different of how hard they would go at it. It was more finesse than, I actually miss it. They made golf pretty. It was art. It was more pretty than just beat driver with a 2-yard cut, hit 7-iron from 205, 2-foot cut, putting contest.
Yeah, and I think it's narrowed the gap so much. Unless you can hit the ball, unless you can get it out there 300 yards, you're not going to compete. There are very, very few medium hitters. A guy like Justin Thomas is lucky. He's a small guy. He's my size, but he's found a way to get it out there and pound it. But back in the 70s and 80s, you'd get a much wider range of distance hitters winning. You'd get guys that would hit at 240. You'd get guys that could hit at 270. You'd get short hitters, long hitters. The variety of winners was much bigger. Now, if you can't smash it with a driver, you just cannot compete, which I think is a pity because it was never meant to be a game of distance. It was meant to be a game of skill. And I think that's the biggest difference between the modern game and the game of 30 years ago.
Speaking of players of today on the American Tour or European Tour, is there 2 or 3 young players that you really enjoy watching when you're doing your coverage?
Yes, I love watching Justin Thomas. I love watching him because I look at him and I think, my God, it must have been fun to be able to hit the ball that far if I could have. But there's so many good golfers. I love watching Ricky Fowler. I think Ricky's, he's different. He's a good guy. Sort of spent time with him at President Cups. And, he is what he is. There's so many good players now. We've got some great players coming out of South Africa, unbelievable youngsters coming through the ranks you're going to see in the next few years in Europe, worldwide. You've got to try and stay impartial when you're doing commentary. But there's no question you do have your favorites. You try not to let it show. But the talent out there is just absurd, isn't it? It really is. I just love watching golf.
Yeah, the person who's ranked 200th in the world anymore is still 1 millimeter away from winning the next tournament, right? The depth, the talent, the athlete. It's the difference between 200th in the world and 5th in the world is so minimal. Small anymore. Yeah. It's
and
crazy
the difference between being a superstar and losing your card on any tour in the world is so small now. It's unbelievable. As I said earlier, sometimes you've got to have the right breaks at the right time too. But there is just so much talent out there, and it's because of the money. There's so many guys that can come out now and make a career out of it, earn not just a good living, but become very wealthy. People are more people chasing the dream now. When we came out, I turned pro in 1980. I wanted to make it my career. It was my dream to be a pro golfer, but there was way less money. I had to pay mortgages, feed family, blah blah blah. But unless you won regularly, you were never going to get wealthy. So that was the goal. But there were less guys prepared to do that. I think it was a bit more of a vocation maybe in those days. You did it because you loved golf so much. That's what you wanted to do with your life. Despite people laughing at you and saying you're an idiot, that's what you wanted to do. So you went and tried.
Well, I've got a couple final ones here, and we'll get you out of Dodge. But I appreciate taking the time today. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Oh, it's a pleasure.
Best 2 or 3 golf courses architecturally you've gotten to play during your career, and it doesn't have to be a course on tour, but just 2 or 3 of the best where I could play that golf course every single day because it's so good. I didn't play that much in America. Well, I'll go around the world. Royal Melbourne, Alistair McKenzie. In my mind, Alistair McKenzie and Harry Colt were, 2 of the best that ever lived, and basically their courses are the courses that I love. Royal Melbourne, where they played the President's Cup last year. I think one of the real winners there was Royal Melbourne. The fact that the course hasn't been stretched, and with fabulous golf course architecture, it stood the test of time. Sunningdale Old. Sunningdale have been fantastic to me since 1984. Let me do all my practice up there. Sunningdale Old is just, if I was going to die and go to heaven and have to play one course every day for eternity, it would be Sunningdale Old. And then the links courses. You can't ever forget the links courses. St. Andrews, St. Andrews, because of what it is, I'd have to put that number 1 on my list. First time I played it, I thought it was some kind of really bad joke. I was playing with my buddy John Bland in a practice round for an Open Championship. And, I'd obviously heard about St. Andrews my whole life. And the first time I played it, I thought, this is an absolute travesty.
This is just a field with some bomb blast bunkers and just horrendous. I hated it. And I said that to John Brown, and he looked at me and just laughed. And he said, yeah, you'll learn, my boy. And then having played it 100 or 150 times, the more you play it, the more you see the subtleties. And I love it. And to me, links golf is really as good as it gets. Port Rush last year, where they played the Open, I'd never played it. And I stood on the first tee for our first walk around, and I thought, my God, what a golf hole this is. I wonder if there's any more like this. And there were 17 more like that. It was the most phenomenal golf course. So, it's hard to narrow it down when you played hundreds and hundreds. But, those are the ones that, in my mind, I could play forever.
Is Muirfield on that list? I've heard if you're a good golfer, the architecture of Muirfield is one of the, I haven't played it yet, but one of the best for links golf. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Yeah, you know what? Muirfield never really grabbed my attention. In my mind, there were a lot of links courses. Birkdale, fabulous links course. There were links courses that I did prefer. Saying that, Muirfield, the times I did play, it was always tricked up. The rough was a foot high, and to me it wasn't proper links golf. I would love to have played Muirfield as the members played, and I know people say it's fantastic, but I didn't really get to see that side of it because it was havoc when we were out there. Same with Carnoustie. Carnoustie is a fabulous golf course, but when they played it at Open Championships and things, big events like that, they trick it up too much. It becomes unbearable. They play the Dunhill Links tournament. It's one of the 3 courses they play there every year: St Andrews, Kingsbarns, and Carnoustie, and it's not tricked up. And then it is a pleasure to play. But when it's set up for an Open, my God, it is the most brutal test of golf. You never come off there thinking that was fun. And isn't that the bottom line with golf? You want to come off every day, tournament-wise, amateur, pro. You just want to come off and feel, that was a great challenge out there today. I enjoyed it.
Most underrated player on the European Tour who just doesn't get enough credit for how good they really are.
Current player?
Current. That you're watching when you're doing the broadcast, and you're like, boy, is he world class, and people don't realize how good and consistent and solid this player is.
I'll probably say Bernd Wiesberger, the Austrian. He's won a couple of times in Europe. Fabulous player. I still think he's going to have a really good chance in a couple of majors. Matt Wallace. But guys, young Brandon Stone, young South African.
He can play. Yes,
I mean, and there's, when you're at the tournaments most weeks watching these guys, and you look at them, and some of them you look at and think, why is this guy not winning majors? And there are other guys you look at, you think, this guy has to win a major. But there's so much talent out there, and exactly what you were saying, it's such a fine line now between the mega talented and the slightly less talented. And there's just so many guys out there you think, well, this guy's going to win a major, he's going to win a major, he's going to win a major. Sadly, there's only 4 a year. So we might never get to see all of those talents on display.
Last question I have for you is, you got to play in all of the major championships. Which one was your favorite you played in? What makes that major even above the other 3 that you just truly enjoyed the whole experience and it's that special? And which one of those 4 is it for you?
The Open Championship. For me, it has to be the Open. Having come from outside of America, Southern Africa, all you dreamt about was the Open Championship. And the Open Championship at St Andrews was always, that was the pinnacle. But, they're all fantastic. Augusta, I love watching Augusta. I love watching the Masters. I didn't enjoy playing it. I only played in it once in 95. And I've got to be honest, I didn't really enjoy the experience. The course was hugely tricked up. It was the one year as a Mad King gardener that the azaleas didn't come out. I got around to Amen Corner expecting this breathtaking sight, and everything was green. I mean, I was so hacked off. I was it was a disappointment. But I love watching the Masters. Of all the majors, probably I like watching the Masters the most, but playing wise, the Open was the one for me.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for your time. I knew we'd have a great conversation, and I truly enjoyed it. So stay safe and healthy over on the other side of the pond. And like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time out today.
What an absolute pleasure. Before I go, I just want to say that, you said you don't have enough time to practice. I think that was a bailout. I think you're a lazy bastard.
Well, they got 3 golf businesses, 2 small kids, and a demanding wife, If I got time, I just go play.
You can cut that out.
Yeah. You know what it is, though? Honestly, I love playing so much. I truly love playing. And when I have the time, I love playing. And I know I should, like all of us. Like, my golf game's good enough where I can, for the most part, hit a full shot. I should practice the 125 and in more. That's where I can tell that, oh, my God, from 83 yards, that shot was total shit, right? It's 28 feet away, and that's what I should be practicing. But I love playing so much. I just want to go out and play when I have the time. I know. And the equipment does make it easier.
I think most people are like that. Practicing can be a chore. Most people play the game not, they're not necessarily chasing a handicap, trying to get down to scratch. They want to go out and just play. And I know exactly what you mean. And the modern equipment does make that easier, no question.
There is no doubt that you can, if you have a pretty repeatable golf swing, for full swings it's easier, but you still have to practice from like 125 and in. That's still just time, touch, effort, flight control. Yeah, that's where I need to. If I did actually put some more effort in, that's where I'd be putting the effort in. I think most people, if they did that, like you were saying about short game, right? You could get better. Yeah. If you can miss those greens and get up and down, or take advantage of, a wedge shot on a par 5 to make a birdie rather than a par, that's the difference between 75 and 70, right? I mean, we'll do this again in 6 months' time, and I want to see if you've kept your word. All right, I'll try to put a little effort in. If I got questions, I'll send you a message. But I really enjoyed the conversation. I'll put a little more effort into the short game. We'll see where we can get it this summer. All right, and stay safe, and everybody listening, stay safe out there. All keep well. Thanks, Pro. I appreciate it. My pleasure. Thanks, Jason.